Okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 7:02, Chester Historical Society. Well, I know not everybody got their minutes, and so this is Susan Goodfellow. So if you didn't get, there's a couple people here tonight I know that didn't get their, so you can meet with Susan after and give emails, phone numbers, or whatever you'd like. And so Susan's here to do that. So for the people that did get their minutes, is there any questions on the minutes? Okay. Entertain a motion to accept the minutes as read. Second? Second. Motion's been made and seconded to accept the minutes as read. Thank you. At this time, I'll ask Ken to read the treasurer's report.
Be a lengthy one tonight, so you might want to think about sleeping. Your balance at the October 24th meeting was $4,753.71. Now, this is a report for the last 2 months. Calendar sales, $739. Book sales, $105. Donations, $227. 2025 dues, $135. Proceeds from our Christmas party were $409. So for the last 2 months, November, December, the income was $1,615. Expenses were Green Mountain Power for electricity, $134.41. Detail for the monthly service was $99.38. Town of Chester water sewer was $189.49, and then there was a reimbursement to Carla Westeen for purchase from Gaylord Archival of $235.58. So our balance at the end of the year was $5,709.85. That broke down for expenses $3,463.40. Designated for other things $2246.45. So again, the balance at the end of the year was $5,709.85. Our event account remains at $671.89. And then remember we had a 1-year CD that matured on November 1st. So John and I went to the bank to renew it, and we couldn't get the same rate that we had. So we renewed it for 6 months. So that'll mature on May 1st, but the interest generated was $130.99. So our 6-month CD is $3,035.27 at 3.25% interest. So that, any questions about November, December? If not, then for January, balance on January 1st was $5709.85. For this month so far, calendar sales $45, book sales $65, 2025 dues $120, and donations $1,005 for an income of $1,235. For expenses, we just electricity $58.14 and telephone $49.74. So our balance as of tonight is $6,836.97. Of that, the balance for expenses is $45.90.52, and then that put and designated amount is $2,246.45. The event account, of course, remains at $671.89, and our 6-month CD at $3,035.27. Any questions?
No questions, but I do have a comment. I'd like to thank Nancy Shute on Main Street. The reimbursement that was made to me was because I used my credit card to order the Gaylord boxes online, but it actually came out of a donation for Mrs. Shute. She wanted to make sure that we had the archival storage materials, and so we are very thankful for her. She is the one that actually paid for those.
Okay. Any other questions for Ken? Entertain a motion to accept the treasurer's report. In a second. It's been seconded. Motion's been made and seconded. Thank you, Ken. Okay, so as far as calendar sales, there's still some calendars. They're all out, but Erskine's has 8 left. Stonehearth Antiques has a few. Salon 2000 might have a couple, and there's a couple downstairs. But so there's probably about 20 calendars still out there that need to be sold, but they are all out there. I spoke to Noni Spalding tonight. Ted's in Springfield Health and Rehab, but recovering. He's got pneumonia. So, but he's coming along good, and he wants to come home next week. So Ted's tough, and I assume he'll be home next week. I've been talking to Bellas Falls Historical Society. They've purchased a building on Canal Street. It's going to be quite an undertaking getting all their stuff from where they're located now on Main to Canal Street. And they were going to give me a date when they were going to move. I was going to volunteer a few hours to help them. So when I get that date, if anybody wants to volunteer to help them out on the day they move to their new location.
Who was that, John?
Bellas Falls Historical Society. They've been on Main Street, and they have a beautiful building on Canal Street. I went down to see it the other day. If you're looking out the front of the building, you're looking over into the train yard and the Chamber of Commerce. And so Annette Spalding's been working down there and keeping me posted. And we're also going to, one of their speakers on railroads is going to come here to speak at our historical society. So we're going to try to help them out a little bit. Recently, Susan and her husband told me about a barn presentation they went to on vintage barns of Vermont. And so I've got a message into the Weston Historical Society and a message into Bruce Foster and of who that speaker is, so we can have him come here. I think that'll be a great event to historical barns of Vermont. Next month's speaker, and I forgot her last name, Ren, is going to do vintage clothing. So the 4th Thursday next month, it'll be Hollywood fashion. And there's a big buzz around town. They're looking forward to this event. It's next month here. And so, what's Ren's last name? Antonowitz. Yeah. So if you remember, Ren gave a short presentation at when we had at the Legion, Walt Austin. And she gave a short presentation. Now she's going to do one for us in February. I think that's all I have. Before we get started, is there some questions for me? Okay, we didn't have a guest speaker for this month, so I was talking to Steve Perkins from Vermont Historical Societies. So he suggested, well, for the months that you don't have a meeting, go on to vermonthistory.org. We have a lot of short clips. Yep. So I was talking to Steve Perkins, and that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So he suggested that I go on to historyvermont.org and pull up some short clips of historical events here in in the area. So Renee, I got together with her the other night. We pulled up about 10 of them. They last from 3 to 5 minutes long. I think we're starting off with Westminster Massacre. And Renee, you can start the presentation. Thank you. You need this?
So right across my left shoulder, back here, is the original site of the Westminster Courthouse. This is a central piece of the foundation of our state, of the first republic, and then the state of so many stories associated with it. We're going to go visit the Westminster Historical Society Museum and speak with Jesse Haas, who's the president of the society, to give us some insight into some of these stories. Great, let's do it.
So by 1775, this was part of Cumberland County, New York, as a further extension of the historical area between the colonies and Great Britain. The Continental Congress didn't have an embargo. And all the colonies voted in piracy, so they had to go back to that. New York did. This county did.
And this was the history where in Westminster with Steve Perkins, Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society. Steve, what brings us here this week? So right across my left shoulder, back here, is the original site of the Westminster Courthouse. This is a central piece of the foundation of our state, of Vermont First Republic, and then the state of so many stories associated with it. We're going to go visit the Historical Society Museum and speak with Jesse Haas, who's the president of the society, to give us an insight into some of these stories.
Great, let's do it.
So by 1775, this was part of Cumberland County, New York, as a further extension of the struggle that was going on there between the colonies and Great Britain. The Continental Congress says we're going to have an embargo. And all the colonies voted in the Congress to do this, but they have to go back and ratify it. New York didn't. This county did. And they're like, now what? We say this by closing the court. The court is New York government here. The court was to open on Tuesday. On Monday afternoon, they gathered at Azariah Wright's farmhouse down on the flat below Courthouse Hill. They about 100 people altogether. They were not armed. So they came to the courthouse, and literally half an hour later, the posse arrives from Brattleboro with guns. The sheriff had come up the hill with his posse really liquored up, and they charged the doors. And that's when William French was killed. Many of the people who were in the courthouse had burst out the side doors or, sort of right straight through the sheriff's posse and run to spread the word. And we have to remember, this is about a month before Lexington and Concord. So it was like the big news for about a month. And then there was bigger news.
Vermont's own independence was then reflected here in Westminster 2 years later.
And actually, it wasn't Vermont at the time. It was New Connecticut, which they crossed that out and said Vermont. But so New Connecticut, in theory, declared its independence here. But so the very historic courthouse, which unfortunately then they took apart and recycled.
For the benefit of anybody that might want to know more beyond what they've heard and seen here about these two seminal events surrounding the Westminster Courthouse, what sorts of resources can you point people to?
We have a website, we have a Facebook page, we have this museum, which we will be opening in, July 4th weekend. So it's going to be open, we hope, Saturdays through the summer, and then by appointment at times.
The former home of a revolutionary courthouse at this place in history.
We had no power when we got here tonight, and we had to hook this stuff up. So thanks a lot to Amber and Renee, or we wouldn't be able to. I don't know, Ruthie, can we? tonight. Any questions on the first one?
Thomas Chandler was from Chester, the first settlers here. He was involved in this incident, and he went to New York with the king, and kind of realized that he wasn't going to go that way. And then the Allen brothers were coming, and he was going to all erupt, so he changed, he turned his coat, so to speak, and cited the revolutionary pose. And he paid a price. In that, in fact, that he was selling land that he didn't have a clear title to, he ended up in jail. In that courthouse, we had a jail, it was a jail. And he had written to the legislature that had leniency, because he was an old man. And he said, I can't pay all my debts, I can't pay all these people back, but I'll give you everything that I have. So that message went up to the state house, and they debated it. They decided yes, that they would release him, even because he was old. And by the time they got back with the message, he had died. And he had died in jail. And back in the day, his family thought that if they went and got his body, that they would be liable for his death. So they did not want to claim his body. So the jailer, this is June, mind you, the jailer had a dead body in his jail that was starting to decompose. And they decided they had to do something with it, but they would get in trouble if they took his body off the premises. Because that's the law. So they devised a scheme right next to that courthouse that they just showed you. The next door neighbor was a churchyard, and it was a graveyard, a churchyard. So in the middle of the night, the jailers went out and they dug a ditch from their property under the fence into the graveyard, and they took Mr. Chandler's body and they slid him down into that ditch, into the graveyard on the other side of that area.
Isn't that a story?
He escaped. He escaped, is what they said. By that time, they
Thank you, Carla. Yeah. So next up is Hildine. Yes.
At this place in history, we're in Manchester, and we're at Hildine, and Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins, is going to tell us more.
I know, this is so cool. This is like a beautiful house on beautiful grounds. They've got goats, they've got trains, they've got Abraham Lincoln's hat. So we're going to go check in with Paula Maynard, who is one of the really cool educators here, and learn all about it.
So Hildine, this is the Lincoln family home. Paula, how did the Lincolns come to be in Vermont?
Oh, it's a very exciting story. Actually, during the Civil War in 1864, Mary Lincoln brought her young son Tad, and was met at the Equinox Hotel, which still stands today in Manchester, was met there by Robert Lincoln, their oldest son. Now, many people don't know this, but I'll insert here that of their 4 children, Robert Lincoln, the oldest, becomes the only one who survives to adulthood. He ended up being a successful attorney in Chicago. He also ended up with a law partner named Edward Isham. Edward Isham's family home was located right at the edge of this property where our exit road is. So Robert was coming back to visit, and probably at that time looking at pieces of the land and thinking, how can I put all this together? So we're fortunate that he decides this is the place where he's going to build his ancestral home, to be a place where his descendants would come to. And in fact, that's what happened. For the 3 generations, 70 years, nobody but a Lincoln ever lived here, including the last 3 what would be great-grandchildren of Abraham and Mary. Peggy Beckwith, the one girl, lived in Vermont until she died. There were 2 other boys. Now, what most people are not aware of, the direct descendancy from Abraham and Mary Lincoln ended with those 3 children. So the legacy we have to protect, the family's history here, is we take it very seriously. But we are also profoundly aware that all of that really goes back to Abraham Lincoln. So all throughout the property, people are linked with not only Robert and his family's history, but the fact that it's Abraham Lincoln's values that everything that we do here is rooted in.
So we have the house, and then there's this brick square out front. Can you tell me what that brick square is?
It's probably the least expensive but most valuable thing we've ever done by putting the imprint of the footprint of the cabin that Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky in the front yard, directly in front of the mansion that his son built in just one generation.
I've heard that you have one of Lincoln's top hats here.
It has traveled a great deal. In the last several years, it's been to the LBJ Presidential Library, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, and prior to that, Disney. We're happy it's home for a while because it's nice in its case. It's the best preserved of the three in existence. The other two, one is in the Smithsonian, and the other is in the museum in Springfield Museum, the Lincoln Museum. So we're very proud to have it in Little Old Vermont, and it's never really left Vermont except to go traveling.
So now we moved into the woods, and there's a gorgeous Pullman car right behind us. Why is that here?
Well, you really can't tell the complete story of Robert Todd Lincoln unless you have a Pullman car. And that's because he was president of the Pullman Palace Car Company when it was the largest manufacturing company in the world, and it also employed the most freed slaves and their descendants. Historically, these trains were renovated over periods of time. So in its first iteration, it was called the Ortega, and it was President McKinley's car. In the second iteration, which it is out here in 1903, it had to come off the line while Robert was president for us to have this car here. This car did just that under the name Sunbeam, and it took care of 18 people, and they could ride, sleep, eat, socialize, all within this one car. So it would have had one porter and one chef. So it was the type of car that would have been used by a family or a group of executives. We choose at this car and at this exhibit to tell the 100 years of history between Robert's father, Abraham Lincoln, and the Emancipation Proclamation, and the March on Washington in 1963. So it's quite a provocative exhibit. It's very popular, and it's the southernmost stop on Vermont's African American Heritage Trail because of that story.
So when can people visit this incredible place?
They can visit every day of the year except 5 holidays between 9:30 and 4:30.
At this place in history.
Was there any questions on that? Cornish covered bridge?
At this place in history, we are not in Vermont. We are in Cornish, New Hampshire, with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. I'm guessing we're doing something that ties to Vermont.
In fact, it ties New Hampshire to Vermont.
There we go.
Right? It's this really big bridge that's behind us, and beautiful Vermont is right across the river behind us. We're talking about the Cornish-Windsor Covered Bridge.
And big it is. It's the first thing that catches your eye. It's very long.
It is very long. Up until 2008, it was the longest covered bridge in the United States. A modern covered bridge was built in Ohio that supplanted its supremacy, but it is still the longest two-span covered bridge in the world, meaning there's only one pier there. So you've got 2 spans of wood going across. And it's very old. It was built in 1866, and it's still taking automobile traffic today.
So exactly how long is this bridge?
So the bridge is 449 feet long, and the length of that bridge made it a very popular kissing bridge. So the idea behind a kissing bridge is you could go into the bridge and it gave you enough privacy as you were crossing that bridge to, have a little smooch on your way across the river. So it's a town lattice truss bridge, and we've talked about that in the past. In this program, you took a lot of small pieces of wood and created a crisscross pattern with it that carpenters could then just kind of nail together, and it helped support that bridge. So it was a private bridge, starting from when it was built in 1866 all the way up until 1936 when the state of New Hampshire took over operation of it. And it was a toll bridge. And one of the interesting stories about this bridge when it first opened is it connected dry Vermont. So Vermont had been dry since 1850, meaning no alcohol in the state, to wet Cornish, New Hampshire. And so they only charged a couple of cents to cross the bridge into New Hampshire, but they charged more to go back into Vermont, knowing that more people wanted to go into New Hampshire to, have their drink, and then they charge them a lot to get home.
Why the need for a bridge in this particular spot?
Well, you have the Connecticut River back here and the very important manufacturing town of Windsor. And so connecting the communities on either side was very important for the movement of goods, the movement of people. And of course, the train came through. The train bridge is right south of us across the river there. So you have the train going back and forth. So you need to move both people and goods. And it was a great business venture. Put it right here, make a lot of money on those tolls.
At this place in history,
Cornish Bridge.
I have a little thing about that. The Cornish Bridge was repaired. My older brother died in '96, so then sometime before that. And they repaired it. When they opened it, he was asked, he had a 1919 Model T Ford Touring car. And he escorted the governor of New Hampshire and some other dignitaries across in that Model T Ford. And then there was some kind of a big thing going on up at, it slipped my mind now, artists, sculptors was up there. St. Garden, period clothing, dancing, and doing all kinds of good things. They make quite a big weekend of the whole thing. So, that's their claim to fame, or was it?
Thank you for sharing that, Lee.
Yeah.
What do we have next? Dorset Quarries? Dorset Marble Quarry?
at this place in history, we're at the Dorset Quarry, and I'm with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. We're standing in the rain, but that's okay.
It's okay because this is a beautiful spot in one of Vermont's most beautiful towns, and this is a really cool old quarry. You can see it driving by on Route 30. I mean, the traffic's going by, but it has so much history. So we're going to meet with the curator of the Dorset Historical Society, John Mathewson, and he's going to meet us over by the quarry. You want to go see?
Absolutely. So, John, is it true that this is the oldest quarry in the United States?
That's my understanding, yes. From 1785 on, it was quarrying marble. At first for small things like tombstones and architectural fragments, lintels, door frames, things like that. And then starting in 1839, once the contract came through for the Erie Customs House in Erie, New York, they started shipping out larger blocks over to Troy, and then down the Erie Canal, or down the Hudson River to New York.
And what was the significance of the quarry to this area?
It was a big employer. There were about 30 quarries in operation at the height of quarrying in Dorset. And Dorset was, of course, originally a farming community, but there were as many people farming as quarrying at one point. 400 farming, 400 quarrying.
And what was this marble used for? Where did you see this marble?
Well, you could see it in houses. So there are some houses locally made from marble, but then it was shipped all over. The Erie's Custom House, like I mentioned, and also, well, the New York Public Library came from this hole in the ground. Wow! This hole in the ground produced the DAR building in Washington, D.C., a building in the Harvard Medical School, and the New York Public Library. Not the Lions. They came, Lions, we haven't had catamounts for a while. They came up from Tennessee. Pink Tennessee marble.
Yep.
Which makes sense. And other quarries in the area in Dorset went to other purposes. Is significant, including the Montreal Museum of Art in Montreal.
So what are the quarries being used for today?
Well, all the quarries in Dorset are closed now, and they have been for a long time. There was an effort to revive some in the 1960s, but that never came to fruition. The closest quarry in operation now is in Danby. It's a huge tunnel into the same mountain is behind us. And they use it for, well, you used some of the product this morning. If you,
toothpaste?
Yes, if you brush your teeth, and I hope you did, you use calcium carbonate, which is Dorset marble, or Vermont marble. Also, the whitener that makes paper glossy in your magazines, that's also calcium carbonate from marble.
Now, the quarries seem to be offering a bit of recreation. You can't ignore the activity going on behind us.
The quarries were open, and it is pouring rain out, and busloads of people are coming. It's amazing. The quarry was in operation from 1785 to about 1774. It closed down for a few years, opened up again in 1901, closed down again in 1901. So, about 100 years of operation. And then when they abandoned the quarry, they had hit the water level. They weren't pumping the water out anymore, so it filled with water. And by 1922, people were swimming here in the quarry. So people have been swimming here in the quarry for as long as it was an actual marble quarry.
Now, if people want to learn more about the Dorset quarries or Dorset history in general, where can they go?
Well, I think the best place to go is the Dorset Historical Society in beautiful downtown Dorset, the Bly House Museum. You can visit our website to find out our hours, dorsetvthistory.org. And if you want to plan your visit before you come, go to our website, go to our Dorset History Go tab on our homepage, and you'll find a bunch of interactive maps of historic sites in Dorset.
Well, thank you, John.
Yeah, thank
so, quarrying in Dorset, right?
Yeah. Hey, should we go swimming?
Well, we should jump in. That's right.
We're already getting a little wet, right?
I think you should.
At this place in history.
Questions on the marble quarry? The Danby quarry that he was mentioning that's still operating today, that goes a mile underground. It's like a little small city underneath it. It's all lit up, and trucks go in and out of there 1 mile. There was a guy here I went to school with, Mike Blair, that worked there. Up until he passed away, he was there for over 30 years. I never cared to go 1 mile underground. And he asked me if I wanted to, and a lot of people did work there, but it always seemed a little bit eerie. What's that? Snow roller? Snow roller?
At this place in history, we're in Peacham with Steve Perkins, the executive director of the Vermont Historical Society. Steve, last week we got a general overview of sorts of the Snow Roller Museum, the only one of its kind in Vermont and maybe anywhere in America. We also have learned about the work involved in packing down the snowpack on roads with one of these. It was work that was, if not back-breaking, then certainly bone-chilling.
Definitely, Mike. So Steve Gallinan and Jane Alper from the Peacham Historical Association are going to give us insight into the people who did this and what it meant to operate one of these machines.
The drivers were perched on, especially the tall ones, usually on the very top of the center over 2 wheels that were being pulled. They were subject to the wind. They were subject to the storm as it's going on. There's a story that I've heard that they used
That's okay. I would just continue.
lanterns so they could keep going at night, so they could have the roads sort of ready in the daytime. Some of them are all built kind of to their own region. There's a few that have metal seats that are attached to the back. There's others that the metal seat was attached to the front, just like the hay rakes would be. In any case, it was still being pulled by animals. You were in the middle of the storm when it was happening. There was not too much storage on them. They didn't have to use ballast except on the smaller ones. They wrapped themselves in these buffalo blankets to keep warm and would keep the wind off of them. I heard from one of the old-timers who used to drive, said that it was the coldest job he ever had. John Chandler was the one that I knew personally, and he said that if anything ever happened, if you ever slid off of it or anything, chances to survive having one of these things roll over you would be really rough. We did not, but there were fatalities in other areas across the state. I think we had 6 teams that went out, but they usually went in pairs. Then one would work for about 4 hours, take a break, and the other one would move in with their team. And the local farmers were many times the drivers because they also housed their own horses or their oxen, and they had to be with their own team.
It was formally opened on the 4th of July. We have a tractor parade in town, and in that parade, this large roller was ridden. Dick Hovey and his daughter Valerie were sitting in the box up there,
and it made a noise. They all had a bell. A couple of older women have told me that when they were kids, they'd hear the tinkle of the bell coming along, so that people knew to get out of the way. But she said, we all knew that sledding was coming next. And it was just so funny that they looked at it as a real positive thing. Many of the drivers used to stop at certain farms, and they would call ahead, and the farmers' wives would have their lunch ready for them so they could actually get inside, and their teams would be watered and fed while they were eating, so they'd have a break too.
So go to Peacham Historical Association online, look at the contact information, and give you a call or drop you a line and say, hey, I want to see the Snow Roller Museum.
A tinkling bell on a roadway didn't always mean an ice cream truck at this place in history.
Questions on snow rollers? We have some pictures of the Chester Historical Society and snow rollers. I don't know if we still have one in the town of Chester. The last one burned over there at Lackey's. Yeah. So at Stone Village at Lackey's house, there was a roller until my house burned. So yep, which is too bad. Last Catamount in Vermont.
Local news that matters on Local 22 News.
At this place in history, we're in Montpelier with Amanda Gustin, the Public Programs Manager for the Vermont Historical Society, and we're at the Vermont History Museum. What are we talking about today?
So we're going to go inside the Vermont History Museum, and we're going to see an object that a lot of people call the most exciting object in the History Museum. It's something that Calvin Coolidge wrote when he was a boy. He still remembered as an adult getting to come face to face with part of Vermont's history. Let's go.
All right, Amanda, I have to agree with Coolidge. I've been here a few times before, and this is certainly one of the most memorable parts. What is going on here?
So it's a catamount. This is the last catamount shot in the state of Vermont. Catamounts were hunted in Vermont for quite a while. Before that, it was actually part of the first set of laws of the state of Vermont that you could legally hunt down and receive a bounty for killing a catamount. So on Thanksgiving Day in 1881, a 15-year-old boy named James Cadwell was out, and he came across some tracks in the freshly fallen snow. So he went and got a few more people. One of them was a man named Alexander Crowell, and eventually they came across this catamount. And Alexander Crowell shot him twice and killed him. And then for years afterwards, they actually they mounted him and they brought him around and charged people to see him.
For people who are new to Vermont or maybe aren't familiar with the term catamount, where did that nomenclature come from?
That's a great question, and it's one we get a lot. So let's head to a different part of our exhibit, and I'll tell you. The catamount, which is also a mountain lion, a cougar, a panther, and a ton of other words, is actually one of the most widely distributed mammals in the whole world. So you can imagine there's a lot of local names for this same animal. In Vermont, there are 3 words that would describe this animal. The earliest would be bitolo, which is the Abnaki word for catamount. It means long tail. Around the time our cat was killed, it probably mostly would have been panther, and now we most commonly use the word catamount. It comes from Cat of the Mountains. It actually comes from Shakespeare, and you see that word used sort of up and down Appalachia, including here in Vermont.
At what point did the general view go from a nuisance animal to maybe sort of a sense of regret?
Yeah, so the last was killed in 1881, right? Within about 50 years, the language starts to change, and they see all these qualities that they had feared in the catamount, how what an incredible predator it was, how athletic it was, and they started to think, those are positive qualities too. So you start to get, starting in about the 1920s, this just slow build of things that are named after the catamount, and by the middle of the century it's just exploding. And of course now, you drive around on the highway, you see a truck pass you with a Catamount business name, there are the license plates, and there is artwork, and all of these things that we use today. Catamount has just become shorthand for a certain representation of Vermont.
There are people watching this who know that they have seen a catamount. What do you say to them?
I say people have told me dozens and dozens of stories of having seen a catamount. Vermont Fish and Wildlife says they get anywhere between 50 and 75 sightings of catamounts here in Vermont today. And a couple of biologists that I talked to when I was putting this exhibit together said it's not if, it's when they come back. So you know what you saw. I'm not going to tell you otherwise, but I would encourage you, if you have seen a catamount, we have a section of our exhibit here where you can tell us. So come to the Vermont History Museum and tell us about it.
At this place in history.
Local news that matters.
Has anybody seen a catamount?
Yep.
I believe you.
Down by
sightings.
Down behind Stratton Mountain, there's an old Forest Service road. That was work, and just dry, rough road. And driving up there one morning and saw something across the road, and I said, what's that? But there's no mistaking the tail and the way they walk. So. When was that? That would have been 1993, maybe 2, 3, somewhere there.
And you guys remember when that catamount came through Vermont that was killed on the Merritt Parkway down in Connecticut?
Yeah.
That came down through here, and up on Wyman Falls Road, there's the Vermont Stone Quarry. And that cat came through that quarry before it made its way to Connecticut and was actually killed on the highway.
Well, I've always believed that. So.
Up in the dungeon where Bob is now, he swears he saw one because, and this was like maybe a year ago, he said it had a long tail. It wasn't just a bobcat. So who knows?
We have stories over the Historical Society in the 30s in Popple Dungeon. Frank Blake and his son shot at one newspaper clipping, and then they had a group of people that met at the Fullerton Inn. They actually had all these people that got together and told their stories about seeing catamounts, but it was very hard to prove what they did.
If you Google catamounts, there's a group that follows them. They say that 3 very legitimate sightings, very believable, very significant sightings of catamounts in Chester in the last 3 or 4 years. And I was sitting in my house, and I was looking out the kitchen window. The kitchen window looks straight out the roadway on the left of the barn, on the right of the hayfield, going uphill. And I saw this brown, light tan cat, and it had a gigantic head. And I was just looking at his head as it was coming straight at me. So he didn't know I was looking at him. It was straight down the road. And I thought, oh my God, what is that? It's huge. I know there are bobcats, this lady with a crane and a gigantic head. And so I ran to get my phone, and I went out on my porch to get a photo. And he took a very sharp turn to his left and ran up our hayfield, so that his tail was hidden by our hay. I did not see the tail. This thing had, his pace was incredible. He went up that hill in, I'd say, 5-6 seconds, and I'm telling you, it was a long hill. He went up that hill, and he must have been taking leaps of about 10 feet each time. All I could see was the head body.
exciting.
Bellows Falls Canal.
At this place in history, we're here in Bellows Falls on a very windy day with the Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. This says Bellows Falls Canal. I didn't know there was a canal in Vermont.
There is. Well, there's a number of canals in Vermont, but this was one of the first canals built even in the United States, which is, I mean, I think it's really cool. I think a lot of people don't know it's here, but we need to move over to the bridge so we can actually look down on the canal and we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, let's go. So I guess my first question, maybe an obvious one, why is there a canal in the Connecticut River?
So we have to go back to the name Bellows Falls. And so the village was originally named Great Falls. So on the Connecticut River, there's a 52-foot falls right here, which is a good place to put a village. You have water power and whatnot. But soon you figured out boats need to get around that. So in 1791, a group of English investors decided they were going to make the Connecticut River navigable from 250 miles from the coast. So that meant up through what's now Vermont. So they started a canal here in 1791. Like I said, one of the first in the United States. It took them over 10 years to complete the canal. So the first boat didn't go through it until 1802.
What would it have looked like?
So similar to what we're looking at today, it was a little narrower. It was only about 4 to 6 feet deep. It took small canal boats. It had 9 locks, which allowed the boats to go down or up that elevation through the Connecticut River. Over time, it widened to take larger boats, but really by the 1840s, people weren't using the canal. They weren't traveling by the river anymore.
How were they traveling?
By train. We think a lot about Bellows Falls now related to train traffic, and there certainly was a lot of commerce on this side of Vermont, but the train was much more efficient than the river ever could be. At that point, the river was used much more for water power, and so the falls that were part of the locks were used to power paper factories. And Bellows Falls really became known as a center for paper manufacturing here in Vermont. Now by the 1920s, 1930s, less and less used. Electricity was used instead in the factories. So the canal was converted over fully into a hydroelectric project. So the locks aren't here anymore. There's a hydroelectric dam that makes power.
We're locking it in Bellows Falls at this place in history.
And on the canal.
They're still using that nowadays.
Hydro. Well, the people that do, Nick Keck does Glasgow.
Yeah.
And all those people on that island are all powered by that. But it doesn't cost them anything. So they can all, have these kilns and these tons of those. It's a very good deal for them. I gotta go back to all this now right now. I thought that's hydro loans,
So you know that 50% of the electricity that Vermont uses, as well as all of the wind, comes from the
Did not know that.
And maybe it's subject to a tariff soon.
Oh, yes.
They ground out every day in electricity to the whole state. And a while back here, they shut down the plant that was producing at 2.4 cents a kilowatt hour because their pay was going to blow up like this. And so they had to buy hydro go back at 14.4 cents a kilowatt to replace that at 2. And that company now is getting 19 cents per kilowatt. So, you can beat your drum and you can do everything you want. If they close it down, decommissioning, burn it, you lose it.
changed a lot, and the designer that's working on that project has done a lot of research, and apparently, I don't know exactly where, but apparently there was a canal right near that bridge that went like downtown Cambridge. There's like a canal underneath one of the bridges somewhere. And I have no idea where it is.
I can give you some information if you want that. It had to do with the Bullet Mills up there. It was early on, and the Fullertons from Chester had a hand in that.
Good. Next one is train wreck. Don't remember.
John, when we were in Proctorsville, the canal was supposed to have gone under, what's it, under a house next to the building. That's where the canal went.
Okay.
At this place in history, we're in West Hartford and with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins, to tell us what we're doing here with this railroad trestle behind us.
Well, railroad trestle on the banks of the White River here. This is the site of the worst train disaster in Vermont history.
Wow.
So we have to take ourselves back to 1887, and it was a really cold night, early morning hours of February 5th. We had a packed train which started in White River Junction. Most of the passengers were headed to the famous Montreal Winter Carnival, so they're taking the train up in the middle of the night. And half an hour into the trip, disaster struck. So as it was coming across the bridge, it was going probably a little too fast. They were in a hurry trying to make up time. The rear passenger car started to shake and started to jump the tracks. And then it pulled the next car and the next car until soon enough all of the passenger cars had been pulled off the tracks and landed on the frozen White River below the trestle. The brakeman witnessed this, and so he had jumped off the train and rolled down the bank, landing on the ice, and saw the cars fall and crash. And the engine and the mail car and the coal tender all made it across the bridge, and so a number of crew members were really the only ones left to help rescue those below.
So there were survivors then. Is that kind of where the story ends?
It's not where it ends. So there were survivors. The cars fell about 43 feet, but ultimately, in smashing on that ice below. But we have these. So I brought this lantern here to show you. This is from the Rutland Railroad, and I know some railroad buffs will say, no, this disaster happened on the Central Vermont Railroad, but this is what I had at hand. But this is a railroad lantern. And if you think of all of these passenger coaches, are all made out of wood. They're lit using kerosene lanterns. And this is in February, so they're heated with coal stoves. So lanterns like this and the coal stoves smashed when these cars hit the ice. The cars are made out of wood, everything caught on fire. So people who survived the initial crash, they started to be burned. I mean, really kind of scary stories.
Are there any first-hand accounts?
There's a guy named with the last name of Tewksbury, and he was going from White River Junction to his house in Randolph. So, I mean, he was 45-minute ride, just going home. He survived the crash, but he was trapped beneath his seat, and he saw the flames coming towards him. He's yelling and screaming for help. He describes an older couple behind him, unfortunately being consumed by the flames, and seeing it coming for him. He said 2 strong men found him, grabbed him by the arms, pulled him. He's yelling, I don't want to be burned, get me out of here. They ended up breaking at least one of his legs, pulling him out of the wreckage, but they got him away. They pulled him across the ice and set him up against one of the piers here under the bridge. So there are other similar stories like that. The train ended up the cars ended up completely burning. But Tewksbury goes on to say, he's sitting against this pier, and he looks up, and he sees that the bridge is on fire. So he's yelling, come get me, you need to move me, I'm not safe anymore. When the bridge was built, it was sheathed in metal to keep sparks from these trains from setting the bridge on fire from the top. I don't think anyone would have thought that this thing would have burned from the bottom, but the burning train on the ice and the bridge on fire, so the next disaster was the entire bridge burned down.
Wow. Wow, so how many people were killed?
So accounts vary, anywhere from 30 to 40 people perished, but most accounts really just say many.
Out of how many, again, were on the train?
89 people on the train. But some, I guess you could say good, or at least regulations came out of this. Federal Railroad Commission started making changes and saying that passenger cars had to use electric lights and electric heaters. They had to stop using kerosene lanterns and coal stoves because of this disaster.
At the site of Vermont's worst train disaster, at this place in history.
What year was that, John? 1880s or something. This will be our last one. It's on the West River.
At this place in history, we're in Newfane with Steve Perkins, the executive director of the Vermont Historical Society. Steve, people can likely figure out that this railway landmark is what brings us here this week, but why does it?
Well, yeah, Mike. So this is the Newfane train station on the West River Railroad, and the Windham County Historical Society did a beautiful job restoring the property. When we were visiting their new home, we saw some pretty interesting graffiti. So we're going to talk with Dick Merrick, who's the president. There's some graffiti that looks like Chinese.
We've had one piece of it translated. It says, when I get out of this place, I'm never going to come back here again. But it is not on the jail side of the building. So our guess, because of the graffiti having several trains on it and things of that nature, this station was built as part of the West River Railroad, and our thought is it might have been a Chinese laborer who was working on the railroad. It was started in 1880. Terminus was in Brattleboro. It was originally intended to go across to Whitehall, New York, where it would connect up with other lines. And of course, it would make every town along the West River the next New York City by having great railroad service. Didn't quite work out. It got as far as Londonderry, and so that's 36 miles from Brattleboro, which gave the line its nickname, 36 miles of trouble, because it was very good at derailments. The station master here, J.J. Green, was killed in a train derailment at the mouth of the West River and the Connecticut River when the trestle gave way under him. He was riding in the front with the engineer, which turned out not to be the best spot to be. They both died. His wife became the station master after that. So we acquired this about 8 years ago in a derelict state and decided it deserved to be saved, and we've been working on it ever since. But we're just extending the last little swatch of track down. We have what is probably the only surviving water tower or tank house in the state at the end of this little stretch of our property, and we finally have track all the way down there. The interesting thing with the water tower was the spring comes in on the second floor because that's where you ought to have the extension to feed the water into the top of the engine. That poses a problem in Vermont when you have water in a large cedar tank on the second floor in the winter. They came up with a very ingenious approach. They decided that they would have a wood stove hooked to a chain, and so they would lower the wood stove to the first floor, load it up, light it up, hoist it up, and have it in the room with the water tank, keeping it from freezing up.
Yeah, who needs 36 miles of trouble when you've got 100 feet of it?
But there also was, at one time, a jelly mill next to this, a building that made commercial jelly. And so they had a little manufacturing operation. There also was a grain house there. So you had kind of a little industrial complex here. One of its biggest customers was a granite quarry in Dummerston, right along the West River. And with the Depression, the need for construction granite was sort of faded away. And with the closing of the granite quarry, the last economic viability of this railroad also disappeared.
So how can people come learn more about this?
Well, we are open from Memorial Day until Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, as we now call it. We are open Saturdays and Sundays in the afternoon, and our admission, as with all of our museums, is free, donation only.
From 1880 to 1936, it was 36 miles of trouble at this place in history.
High school baseball season.
Is our last one? All right. Anybody have anybody read the book, 36 Miles of Trouble? Yeah, I have, yeah, Nancy has. So if you get a chance to get that book, it's a good book, 36 Miles of Trouble, a lot of short stories in there. South Londonderry, Brattleboro. What's that?
John, when Steve Perkins was here last fall, didn't he say that he would love to go to Chester and the story for him?
Yes. Yes.